The Biden administration is making its strongest push yet to get America's gas-fueled auto industry to go green. Ben Tracy reports on the new proposal to make 2/3 of cars sold in the U.S. electric within the next decade.
It's a massive jolt for electric vehicles. The EPA's proposed tailpipe pollution standards are so strict they would effectively force automakers to ditch most gas-powered cars and trucks and put the pedal to the metal on EVs.
Today's actions will accelerate our ongoing transition to a clean vehicles future.
Right now, fully electric vehicles make up just 7% of new car sales. The Biden administration is trying to supercharge that to more than half by 2030 and 2/3 by 2032. Major U.S. automakers are rapidly ramping up production of EVs, but there are concerns about the supply of raw materials for the batteries and whether the nation's power grid can handle charging demands.
And that's ultimately going to determine whether we can reach these levels.
John Bozzella represents the auto industry.
This is clearly ambitious. Is it realistic?
There's no question automakers know how to make electric vehicles. It's going to require a complete transformation of the automotive industrial base if we're going to be truly successful here.
Getting Americans to go electric is key to the Biden administration's climate goals. In the U.S., transportation is the largest contributor to planet-warming carbon emissions. But while 41% of Americans say they are very or somewhat likely to buy an EV, 47% say they are not, mostly because of the cost and lack of charging stations.
Charging stations like this one will eventually need to be on almost every street corner, just like gas stations are today. The Biden administration says it wants a nationwide network of 500,000 chargers by 2030. That's going to take a lot of work, because that's about 4 times as many that currently exist. Chris?
Ben Tracy, thank you. After decades of promises and some disappointments, renewable energy sources are finally taking hold in America. But even with incentives and investments, the United States still lags behind many developed nations in clean power. As of 2021, just 12% of energy consumed in the U.S. was generated from renewable sources like solar, wind, and water. Now, that number could grow, but only with political will. America's energy future is part of the main focus of this year's Columbia Global Energy Summit, which is underway here in New York City. I'm joined by one of the summit's speakers, Vijay Vaitheeswaran. He is the Global Energy and Climate Innovation Editor for The Economist. Thanks for being here.
It's great to be with you.
Polling shows that Americans are very supportive of renewable energy and increasing access for it, but yet we still lag behind most of the rest of the world. Why?
So there's good news and bad news. The good news is we might be at a turning point on clean energy in America. We had last year more renewable energy produced on the grid than coal for the first time in our history. Solar is the cheapest way to make power compared to fossil energy now, thanks in part to the energy shock that Europe has gone through and fossil fuel prices going through the roof. And the most ambitious climate and energy laws have just been passed. The Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure laws, and that's going to give a lot of subsidies and other tax credits for new clean energy. That's the good news. We could even be on our way to becoming a clean energy superpower. You say, well, there's a but there, right?
Right.
The but is we got to build the stuff. And our country has gone bananas. We build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. And so until we overcome the problem of permitting reform, of building transmission lines, allowing new power plants of any kind to be built, we're not going to get to that promised land of having a clean energy superpower. We're going to be stuck really with the kind of assets we have now.
So you touched on the Inflation Reduction Act, the Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act. All of these things were supposed to help spur demand for renewable energy. How is that helping, given that building anything in the U.S. can be tricky?
So it's the early days, but it's time to get going. Those laws, the Inflation Reduction Act, to take an example, gives something like $370 billion of taxpayer money. It could be even more than that. Probably spark $1 trillion of private sector money over the next decade. So we have 9 years left to work with. But the rules are being written by the IRS on who's eligible, what, and in other words, the bureaucracy. So we got to move faster. That's one challenge that Washington's got to work on. The rules we just saw from the EPA are part of this. There are other tax rules on hydrogen energy and carbon capture coming up pretty soon. So Washington is moving, but it's got to move faster. The second thing we have to do is build larger, and that's where Congress has to act. And that's really where your question is at. That's about permitting reform. It's kind of a boring term. Senator Manchin tried to propose it, but it got shot down at the end of last year. And I think that we have to have a bipartisan effort, both left, especially the environmental groups that are historically opposed to building a lot of stuff, as well as the right that's only interested if you build oil and gas pipelines, they're interested, not so interested in the other stuff. We need to find something of a bipartisan agreement, a grand compromise, that we might be able to get Congress to pass permitting reform. Without it, it's hard to do.
Compromise in Congress is hard and slow, and yet demand is growing. And California has already taken steps to ban new sales of non-electric vehicles by 2035. Can the U.S. keep up with this growing demand for renewable energy?
I'll tell you, I'll take one small bit of hope. I agree with you. Gridlock. I spent a bunch of time in Washington reporting a recent cover story for us. It says partisan as ever. Nothing's changed. But I understand self-interest, and that motivates politicians on both sides. The beauty of the climate and energy legislation now is that it's an all-of-the-above kind of law. It's not just a law that promotes windmills, let's say, or just oil pipelines. The Inflation Reduction Act has lots of free money, taxpayer money, your money and mine, that would subsidize everything from ways of using oil and gas cleaner, ways to use hydrogen or carbon capture technologies, as well as, of course, geothermal, the traditional renewables, wind. And most of the beneficiaries are in red states. The law was passed by a Democratic chamber, but most of the beneficiaries, for example, Texas is the leading renewable energy state in America, deep red. Louisiana, oil and gas country, gets a huge benefit from carbon capture. And if you look at where's the wind, it's in the Midwest and in the Southwest, a lot of red states. So what you find is that the industrialists, the companies who benefit from it, and a lot of the voters and communities that benefit are on the red side. And therefore, I think we're likely to see support from both left and right for some kind of compromise to get more stuff built, to get America going again.
Something to watch. Vijay, thank you very much for coming in.
My pleasure.
To the studio tonight.